Thrive students, welcome to week 4 of our Swipe Right series. For those of you that weren't in person, I wanted to be able to put this out here so that you guys could watch it. Or if some of you students that watch it, if you wanted to listen to it again, try to catch up on some of the things you might have missed. This is week 4 of our Swipe Right series. So, sex and dating. We're going to push right into it, guys. Um, We'll be working through the name of this title. The title of this sermon is "Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With?" So I won't be crass, but I will talk about sex throughout this. So if that makes you uncomfortable, probably not the best video for you to watch. But let's go ahead and push through it, guys. When it comes to talking about sexuality, you guys have probably heard this verse quite a bit if you've been around church at all. But I want you to take it specifically when it comes to sexuality. So keep that in mind when you're hearing this verse. All right. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So I wanted to ask you guys, what are the patterns of this world that you would say that the world follows when it comes to sex and how they decide when and why they should sleep with someone? I was just spitting out some of these off the top of my head. Usually it's about gratification. They think I have physical needs that need to be met, or they think no one can tell me what's wrong. It's my choice. It's my body. I can do what I want. Or, everyone's doing it. I don't see what the big deal is. You can see that in the prominence of the hookup culture right now. If you look at Tinder, obviously, a lot of those kind of websites have sections that are specifically just for hooking up with people, right? Specifically for one night stands, things like that. And that just pushes the main thing that our culture thinks about sex, which if we were going to boil it down to one main thing, it would be sex is about me getting what I want, whether that's attention from the person that I'm with, whether that's just a physical release, or if you're in a relationship and the person that you're with, you think the relationship isn't going to go any further unless you give in sexually. That's still a manipulative way of getting what you want. And so, if Christians are different, if we're supposed to not follow the pattern of the world, then what should we look like? I think this is interesting what C.S. Lewis says when it comes to the patterns that Christians follow. He says, chastity is the most unpopular of the Christian virtues. There's no getting away from it. The Christian rule is either marriage with complete faithfulness to your partner or else total abstinence. Now, this is so difficult and so contrary to our instincts that obviously either Christianity is wrong or our sexual instinct, as it now is, has gone wrong. And then if you read that, that seems so hard to follow if you're someone that's not a Christian or when you first become a Christian. That can sound almost crazy in comparison to how our culture looks at sexuality. But if we're 100% honest, Jesus ratchets this up even more, right? He says in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And so this is a high standard. This isn't just don't sleep with somebody before you're married. This is calling you out on the very thoughts that you think, the very way that you look at other people in your mind where no one else can see. This seems like a really tough standard. And some people look at this and they're like, man, Christians put all this stuff around sex. It must be because they're prudes. But that's the exact wrong reason to think through this. The reason that Christians put so many guards around sex, the reason we say sex should be saved for a heterosexual couple in marriage isn't because we're prudes or we don't think sex is important. It's actually the opposite. Let me give you guys a picture to explain that, right? I have this picture of a vault here. When you were a little kid and you had a piggy bank, you didn't take your piggy bank and put it in a bank vault, right? Because it probably had 20 bucks between all the quarters, pennies, and dollars you got for your birthday. You weren't putting it in a bank vault. Now, if you had $1,000,000, you're going to take that and put it in a bank vault because you want to protect it because of its value. That's why, as Christians, we put so many guards around sex, not because it's bad, actually the opposite, because we think it's a very good, joy-filled, God-given gift that we're called to shepherd and protect. We put it in the vault of marriage because it's so valuable, because it's so important. And so we ask the question, why is sexuality so important to God? It's because sex is important to God because people are important to God, right? For Christians, sex is not all about you. It's not all about what you can get. It's not all about how you feel. At least that's not the main point all the time, right? And so I wanted to share something from First Corinthians for you guys to explain this to you a little bit. So in First Corinthians, it says, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, and this is important, this is the part I want you guys to track with, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Now, from the beginning, Christian sexuality was countercultural, and I'll explain why here in a minute, because sexual practice was always supposed to have the other person's good at heart, not just sexual practice, but everything in our lives, right? We're called to love God and to love others. Those are the two primary things that our faith looks like when it's worked out well. We come in somewhere third or fourth place, right? Our lives aren't about us, they're about God and about others. And so that should definitely be the truth when it comes to something as important as sex. I want to explain just really quickly why this was so subversive in the first century in Corinth and in Rome. Paul would have likely said the same thing to the people in Rome. They would have heard the same thing from him, or they may have read the letters from Corinth. The idea that the wife had to yield her body to her husband was not a new idea. In Roman society, men held all of the sexual power, and I cannot overstate how much that is true. Men in Roman society, it was not uncommon for them to have a wife to provide them heirs, to have a mistress that sometimes lived with them purely for their sexual gratification. And if they didn't think that was enough, they could go to a brothel and see a prostitute, and none of those things were frowned upon. They were seen as common, normal, sometimes even encouraged. But the part of this that would have been so subversive and odd to somebody in the first century is that the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but has to yield it to his wife, which for them would have been crazy talk. They would have thought that was insane because it was giving women a power over their sexuality and over their husband's sexuality that was unheard of in that time. So I want you guys to think through that. I want you to understand why God has us do that. And I think Sam Alberry, who has a really good quote for why that is, he says, it's sometimes easy to think that sex before marriage and sex within marriage are essentially the same, that the only difference is timing. But this is not so. One is establishing a context of lifelong self-giving, that's sex inside of marriage. The other is a form of taking. The purpose is not what we can get, but what we can give. Sex outside of marriage is taking something that doesn't belong to you. It's taking a relational and spiritual closeness that you haven't put the time in or the work in to have. And so let me give you guys a picture of what this might look like, right? If you walk into a bank and you're getting ready to deposit some money and you look down the counter and you see that there's a guy at the other end of the counter holding a huge amount of cash, like this guy in the picture I got, right? One of two things is going on. Either one, he just has a really heavy bank account and he's withdrawing a bunch of money, good for him. Or two, if like this guy, he's holding the gun, he's doing the same thing. He's withdrawing money, but the way that he's doing it, the morals that encompass that act are completely different. The act is the same. He's just taking out a huge amount of money, but the way that he's doing it reflects a lot on the morality of it. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about sex. Tim Keller would put it like this: sex is God's appointed way for two people to reciprocally, remember last week I talked about reciprocity when it comes to dating with wisdom, to reciprocally say to one another, I belong completely, permanently, and exclusively to you. We must not use sex to say anything else. So God created sex to weld two people together for good. There wasn't any coming apart. When we treat sex casually, we cause damage. We hurt the other person and ourselves. When I preached this in person to our students, I had two pieces of paper glued together. And I said, this is what it's like when God welds us together in marriage. And then I ripped those two pieces of paper apart. Well, we know when two pieces of paper have been glued together and you try to rip them apart, they don't come apart very easily. Parts of this piece of paper are all over this one's all over this one, and they get ripped up in the process. That's a pretty good picture of what happens to us when we have sex outside of marriage and then we separate from that person. We get damaged, they get damaged. There's parts of us left with them, parts of them left with us. It's damaging. There's not a clean break. And even though we've talked about how our culture treats sex so casually, it doesn't seem very casual, does it? I mean, that kind of violent hurt, it's not casual, even if people would say that it is. So we've seen what the pattern of the world looks like and how our outlook's supposed to be different as Christians. We've seen why the protective mindset that Christians have around sex isn't because we're prudish, because we understand how good and powerful sex is and the way that God created it. So how do we keep from treating sex casually, right? What are some things that we can do to keep ourselves from falling into that cultural ideology that sex is casual? We have to remind ourselves constantly that love, not just sex, but love is not about just getting, but about giving. Or as I put it here, that love is about giving, not getting. Love has to be sincere, guys. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. That's what Paul tells them, to honor one another. And that's especially true in the context of sexuality, guys. We can honor others with our words, our thoughts, and our actions. And so a lot of times when it comes to words and thoughts, sometimes we have this kind of lopsided view that one kind of automatically always leads to the other, which is true. A lot of times our thoughts will come out in our words, but it's also true that the things that we say can push our thoughts deeper. And so let me give you um, a picture of how that's true. I know I've done this, you've probably done this, where when you were upset with someone, you're mad at them, you go to another friend of yours and you just say you're venting and you're like, man, they made me so angry. Usually after you do that, you don't feel a lot better. Usually you're more angry because your words didn't take away any of the problem. They actually push the problem deeper into your thoughts. I love this story that I heard from another pastor who talked about, this story talks about how your thoughts often come out in your words, right? He said that he was in a preaching class at a Bible college, and in this class, everybody had to stand up and give a sermon. And one of the other people in his class was standing up there giving his sermon in a Bible college class. His professor's there, all the other Bible students are there, and he's preaching and he starts getting really passionate. And there's spit flying out of his mouth, and he's, banging the desk and getting really passionate. And then he drops the F word in the middle of his sermon in a Bible class, and the air just gets sucked out of the room. You don't do that regularly, let alone in a Bible class where everybody there wants to do biblical teaching. And the guy that was there said he'll never forget what the professor did. The professor was looking down and he was just writing his notes to give the student when he was done. And he said, as he was writing his notes, he never even looked up. He just said out loud for the whole class to hear, he said, get those words out of your heart and they'll stay out of your mouth. And that has stuck with me. That seems like such a truth that the things that we think on constantly come out in our mouths, and what we say. And so you guys know that I want to finish these sermons. Every single one of these sermons I've tried to finish with some very practical things, with some things that you can learn from, some things that you can do practically. And so guys, I've brought this one up a lot because pornography is very prevalent in guys, especially in high school and sadly in a lot of guys my age. And so you have to refuse to do the things that make sex seem casual. And pornography, when you're watching someone be objectified and they're simply there for your pleasure with no commitment on your part, you're just clicking a screen or looking at something, that presses you to take sex far more casually. Or when it comes to talking about girls inappropriately, we've all been around a group of guys where one guy started talking about a girl inappropriately and said some things about her that he shouldn't have said, usually of a sexual nature. You've got one of two options. Either one, you can stand up and do the right thing and say, hey man, that's uncalled for. We, as men of God, we respect women. We don't talk about them that way. That's not good at all, and that's not how strong men of God act. Or at the very least, turn and walk away from that conversation, because when you listen to those things, even if you don't agree with them, they cause you to take sex far more casually than you should. And lastly, pushing the boundaries physically with the girl that you're dating, or letting her push the boundaries. Those things cause you to just feel like sex is far more casual than it really is. Girls, I wanted to bring this up to you too. Pornography, while I haven't brought this up for the girls in the other sermons, this is something that, even though you might not deal with it, chances are statistically that one of your friends does. She might not say nothing, she might not say anything to you, but there's a pretty decent chance that she might be, a friend of yours might be dealing with it if you're not, right? So if you're dealing with pornography, ladies, or you know someone that is, stop and tell someone, because that will cause you to just objectify yourself, objectify others, and it will just cause you to treat sex super casually. Ladies, this also goes for what you watch. I know a lot of girls enjoy a good romantic comedy, right? Or a good romance movie, which is totally fine. But I do want to say that you need to pay attention to what you're watching. And what I mean is this: a lot of times when we watch a romantic comedy, it's very rare that people wait until marriage to have sex in a romantic comedy. I'm not saying you can't ever watch another movie like that, but what I am saying is you need to have your radar up, and you need to be telling yourself, even though this movie makes it look like this isn't a big deal and it makes the relationship so much better, in real life, that's not always true. It might seem so in the moment, but as you go years down the road, those things are usually destructive and they cause far more problems than they solve. And so I'm not saying don't ever watch one of those movies again, but in your mind, kind of set up that barrier where you're telling yourself the truth that even though this looks like it's not a big deal in Hollywood, in real life, it's a much bigger deal. And ladies, wearing or doing things just to get attention. I'm not going to speak too much on this because I don't want girls to think they can't dress to look pretty, they can't dress to look nice. Specifically, what I have in mind here is sexy selfies, right? We've all been on Instagram where one of our friends posts a picture and we just look at it and say, that's just a trap to get attention. Like, cover up, baby girl. Like, we all know why you took that picture at that angle in that shirt or wearing that. We all know why you did that. And that just causes you and the people that are viewing that picture to take sex far more casually than they should. And that last thing, the same thing for you, ladies. If you are pushing the boundaries physically in your relationship, or you're letting him push the boundaries physically, then you need to put an end to it, or call it out, or tell someone, because that's going to cause you to work. It's going to work in your thoughts, and your actions work into your thoughts and your words, and you're going to end up taking sex far more casually than you should. Lastly, I did not want to finish this video without speaking honestly and openly about, if you've already messed up, there's a pretty decent chance that you may have already messed up sexually, or heaven forbid that you've been abused sexually, something completely out of your control. Some people, as soon as you talk about sex, they immediately feel shame because of what they've done in their past, or sometimes what has been done to them. And so I wanted to stress at the end of this sermon that if you've already messed up sexually, or if 5 years from now you're thinking about your purity and you've messed up between now and then, you need to know that God is in the business of redeeming people. He's in the business of redeeming sexuality when it's been messed up. He's in the business of redeeming all of us, not just one part of us. Shame doesn't rule our lives once we've given our heart to Jesus Christ. And I don't think there's anything that, well, there are probably some things, but one thing that I think emphasizes that really well is this clip that I want you all to watch by Matt Chandler.
The minister got up and he said, "Today I want to talk to you about sex." And so I immediately go, uh-oh, this could be a problem. And he took a red rose and he smelled it and he showed how pretty it was. And then he threw it out into the crowd. He goes, "Everybody needs to smell this." There's about 1,000 of us there, almost all of us college and high school. Smell the rose. I want you to smell it. I want you to touch it. I want you to see the texture in it. You do it. And I'm going to teach. And then he began what honestly, up until this day, and this might have to do with my heart. I'm still wrestling. Was one of the worst, most horrific handlings of what sex is and what it isn't that I ever sat through. It was fear-mongering at its best. It was, you don't want syphilis, do you? And everybody's smiling and having a good time until there's herpes on your lip, and you, right? And so I'm just thinking, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then as it wraps up, he goes, where's my rose? Where is it? Where's my rose? And some kid came up, the rose is just completely jacked up. It's broken, the things are off, the petals are broken. And he lifts it up, and his big crescendo, his point is to hold up that rose and go, now who would want this? Who would want this rose? And I remember feeling anger, like real, legitimate, I want to hurt him anger. And it was all I could do not to scream out, Jesus wants the rose! That's the point of the gospel, that Jesus wants the rose. That he made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Christ won. You're not even teaching the basics of our faith.
So I just wanted to finish on that note, guys, because we know the gospel is so much bigger than our mistakes, that Jesus loves us in spite of all of our mess ups, all of our problems, past, present, and future. He is good. He loves us with an unending love, and he's always, always searching after us. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I've enjoyed sharing it with you, and have a great day. I love you guys. Thanks for letting me be your youth pastor.